I want to speak to the memory of my aunt. Who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
A few moments later.
I was speaking about Zerafui, my father's cousin.
So it does appear that Zohran Mamdani's campaign, despite all of its publicly stated momentum and energy, is starting to stumble quite a bit down the late and final stretch, as is highlighted by the 9/11 comments we'll discuss here today. He cannot get out of his own way. He and his surrogates just continue to create scandals for themselves, and they can't stop saying stupid stuff. And you are starting to see some of that bear out, for instance, in the early voting turnout, where even the Zohran campaign themselves are admitting this is not looking as good for us as we may have previously thought. You can see what they wrote in a recent fundraising email stating, "We are only 3 days into early voting and turnout is already 5 times higher than the 2021 mayoral election, and the highest number of early voters so far, take a look at this, are in the age brackets where Cuomo either ties or leads Zohran in the latest polls." In other words, despite a lot of energy and momentum from a younger demographic, for some odd reason, it's mostly older voters coming to the early voting booth. And obviously, those types of people are more inclined to back Cuomo and are scared of Zohran Mamdani. You're also seeing that in the polls as of this week, where Fox News is reporting that Andrew Cuomo has actually cut into Zohran's lead by a little bit. It's now 44 to 34. Cuomo's only down by 10 as compared to 20, which obviously take that with a grain of salt because Cuomo's still losing pretty badly. But again, what is this kind of late slipping that is going on? Well, that is further backed up by the prediction markets out of Kalshi, where, the question here, will Zohran outperform the polls? Most people believe this to be true, is that over a 50% chance now in reaction to those early voting numbers is down to only a 41% chance, a minority chance. The majority chance now is actually he's going to slightly underperform the polls. But of course, what you're looking at, right, is a guy who is not actually that popular, despite all this talk about this progressive mandate because he won a primary against a really bad candidate by basically miraculous circumstances in a deep blue city. All these leftists nationwide are saying, see, Zohran is the energy we need, let's carry him into 2026. But the reality that I think you're about to see is he's barely going to win by, maybe 40 to 50% of the entire vote in New York City, which will go in actually as one of the least popular mayors in the city's history immediately from the moment he gets inaugurated. But let's run his platform, nationwide. That sounds like a fantastic idea. As a matter of fact, looking at it right now, I'll say this. If 3 things were true, which they're unfortunately not, given everything that just happened, I would say Zohran would be on track to lose. Again, given this, if Andrew Cuomo were not a terrible candidate running a terrible campaign, he'd probably be winning right now. Obviously, he is a terrible candidate running a terrible campaign. If B, ironically, Governor Andrew Cuomo back in 2020 had not driven all the Republican voters out of that city and out of that state, who he's now trying to beg to come and save him. But it's too late, Andrew, right? They're already in Florida. You basically politically terraformed that state in a reverse way that DeSantis did. And now you're facing the consequences of the only people left in New York City. Well, there you go. And I would say even point number 3 here. If it were true that almost 40% of the New York City population, citizen population, were not foreign born outside of America, which they are, then breaking down by the math in the polls, actually, Andrew Cuomo right now would be on pace to win. But obviously, this is the Leviathan the Democrats have created. I have no sympathy for them basically being crushed under it. And so that's just what happens, right? You want to blame anyone, frankly, blame Andrew Cuomo and the Democrats for the reason why Mamdani is ahead right now. But that said, I do want to bring you some of these late scandals that are rocking the Mamdani campaign in today's video. Whether it's this ridiculous 9/11 comment, which was bad enough already, basically claiming that Muslim people and Islamophobia were the real victims of 9/11. But it turns out on top of that, there were some key facts and misleading context not actually left in those comments themselves, as well as, some other aspects, things coming up about his family. Kathy Hochul, the back and forth they had there where the fans are trying to basically boo her out of the stadium for not wanting to raise taxes. And then she's like, oh, well, I thought they were saying let's go bills and all this garbage. And again, some of this late trouble that is rocking the Mamdani campaign, I repeat, it could be very consequential, if not for the fact that Cuomo screwed everything up and Zohran's going to win anyway. But I do think it's significant, right? If you underperform the polls, if the race is way closer, even if it's by 10 points, than you were thinking it was going to be, yeah, that is actually still positive news. Not for New York City, the end result is the same, but nationwide for the idea that this progressive mandate is actually that popular. So we'll see what happens. We'll tell you about it. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, okay, so I want to bring you these recent 9/11 comments that he made, which were already bad enough. But again, it turns out that this so-called aunt that he was referring to was not actually his aunt. So here, take a listen to what he recently had to say about Islamophobia, and then we'll give you the updates, as apparently people started to fact check it. And it's like, oh, the guy's full of crap and has the weirdest family of all time. Yeah, you don't say. Take a listen.
I want to use this moment to speak to the Muslims of New York City. I want to speak to the memory of my aunt. Who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
Yeah, so I think it, first of all, goes without saying that in themselves, even without this new context that we're learning, those comments were disgusting enough alone, right? To be running as the mayor of New York City, of all places, and when you get teary-eyed about 9/11, it's not because you remember being there that day or the horror of the videos watching all of that happen. It's not because you are mourning the 3,000 some Americans who lost their lives, and guess what? Will never be able to take the subway ever again, or your free buses. You know why? Because they're dead, Zohran? No, you're getting emotional for your supposed aunt who was too scared of Islamophobia, in your own words, to take the subway. And as you know, the insinuation of that, obviously, this is the real story. This is the takeaway from 9/11. Utterly disgusting enough. Except it doesn't stop there. Because people started doing research into who Zohran Mamdani's actual aunt is, and keep in mind, he's speaking here in front of this Islamic congregation or whatever, that's specifically the audience here. Well, it turns out his aunt is a woman, his biological aunt, to be clear, is a woman by the name of Masuma Mamdani, and it was impossible for that aunt to be taking the subway in New York City in 2011, or 2001, I should say, because the aunt was living in Africa at the time. You can see, according to the LinkedIn here, she was a senior program development officer at a group in Tanzania. This weird kind of these weird story behind his family of them, moving to Africa and basically gentrifying the place and neo-colonizing the place, you could say, through a bunch of shady business interests. But he's this real, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist leftist. But anyways, besides the point, again, she was working in Africa, and by the way, she doesn't wear a hijab, as you can see. So it's like, what is going on there? Well, here is the reporting from the New York Post, who is noting that Zohran Mamdani did not tell the whole story about the supposed hijab-wearing aunt who feared for her safety post 9/11. Apparently, now the news story, and I have to say, honestly, I'm not sure I believe this one either, right? But now they're claiming the aunt who Zohran Mamdani said was too afraid to wear her hijab on the subways after 9/11 is actually his dad's cousin. The Socialist, which, not a biological aunt, right? And people might say, oh, that's a little bit petty, isn't it? I mean, it's basically an aunt, sort of. No, actually, my greater point about this is, again, his entire family story and background is false and disingenuous, and this is just the latest example of it. So if it were an isolated gaffe where he didn't absolutely clarify, I might say okay. But again, given the context of everything else we know about this guy and his background, no, I'm going to scrutinize everything he says because I don't believe a word of it, right? The guy is this the same guy currently claiming, oh, I live in a rent-stabilized apartment. I'm an ordinary working man. No, you're not. You're a freaking trust fund baby. okay, whose family basically are like business tycoons of Africa, and then you got driven out of Africa because the Africans were so mad that you kept exploiting them essentially, and now you're here LARPing as this everyday working man socialist, I'm like, I'm an amazing progressive and all. It's totally garbage. It's all freaking made up. It's all fake. That's why I don't even believe this story in itself, right? Okay, so now they've clarified who the family member is. How do we have the proof actually that this person A is actually real, but also B lived their life and had this life story that you're claiming? I don't believe a word of it. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyways, the Socialist mayoral candidate made that revelation during a press conference on Monday after critics seized on his story, sharing those photos on social media of a woman they identified as his aunt who was pictured without a hijab. So that said, I want you to take a listen now to Zohran Mamdani's most recent comment about it, where he's tried to backtrack and clarify who he was actually talking about here, who again is not an aunt, but actually his dad's cousin.
Yes, I was speaking about my aunt. I was speaking about Zerafui, my father's cousin, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And for the takeaway from my more than 10-minute address about Islamophobia in this race and in this city to be the question of my aunt tells you everything about Andrew Cuomo and his inability to reckon with a crisis of his own making.
Well, this guy's shamelessness truly knows no bounds. Because notice how even in the clarification statement, where he is attempting to explain who this family member is, he still does not view any criticism of his actual comments to be legitimate, right? He goes back to Islamophobia. Yeah, if you disagree with my disgusting comments about 9/11 or my associations with Hassan Piker, who literally said America deserved 9/11, then you're just an Islamophobe. And this is all a crisis manufactured by Andrew Cuomo. Really, is that who's bringing it on, right? Andrew Cuomo, the guy who can barely communicate, barely is running a campaign. No. I think actually just people, and especially knowing the city that you're in, I understand most of your vote support is coming entirely from immigrants. We broke down that poll for you, right? But for people who actually lived and grew up in that city, no, it has nothing to do with Andrew Cuomo. It's about the fact that you said that, and instead of taking accountability as usual, as we've seen time and time again, as he does, as many Hassan does, as many others in the progressive, like Muslim left do, oh, you disagree with our rabid, insane, violent anti-Americanism? You're just an Islamophobe. You're just a bigot. You're concerned about, for instance, migrant crime, Islamophobia. You don't think that Sharia law and calls for public prayer should be blasted across American cities like Dearborn, Michigan? Islamophobe, right? We literally see this time and time again. It is such ridiculous garbage. No, you calling us names is not going to be able to distract or effectively dwindle down the fact that no, you're an insane anti-American. That's all that this really comes down to, right? But no, you're questioning my family background. Yeah, my crazy shady family of weird private equity, but I'm such a socialist and all this stuff. Yeah, you're an Islamophobe. Shut up. Serious. All this guy ever does is freaking whine. And then, of course, we're supposed to sit here and believe he's a real visionary candidate running on ideas. No, he's not actually. Because literally, any time that he is criticized about something he says or how his policies don't make sense, he either says, oh, well, you just have to believe, that's literally what he said in the debates about how he's going to pay for this stuff, or he calls you an Islamophobe. This guy cannot actually take any real criticism when you break down the stupidity of the things he actually says and presents. Time and time again. Islamophobe. Okay. So, you heard the excuse that he tried to make there. Fui means paternal aunt in Urdu and Hindi. So he got the languages mixed up there. Good job, buddy. That's not what we would necessarily call it. But Mamdani's campaign, here's what's interesting, right? So he didn't give the full name of the woman, just gave the first name or last name, whatever, right? Mamdani's campaign did not provide the cousin's full name when asked. So in other words, even in his clarification comment, I want to reiterate here, we don't know if she actually is real or she actually exists. Okay, that's why I still say it's completely full of crap, So questions began to mount on social media after a tearful, everyone's an Islamophobe because they don't want to surrender the city to criminals. Recalled how his aunt made the painful decision to stop taking the subway in New York City after facing Islamophobia in the aftermath of the 2001 terrorist attacks. Blah, 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 blah. J.D. Vance responded, for instance, by saying, according to Zohran, the real victim of 9/11 was his auntie who got some allegedly bad looks. He railed in a post on X. Yeah, exactly. So, internet sleuths pointed out, yeah, this aunt, the actual aunt, is not someone who obviously wears a hijab. And there you basically have that. Cuomo went on to tell reporters, I think it is insulting to all New Yorkers. Hassan Piker is the person who said America deserved 9/11 and many other comments. After, of course, Mamdani disavowed Hassan Piker in the debate, but then still allowed him to come to the rally, his big rally, obviously, over on Saturday and this weekend. So, there you have it. And I would, once again, just like to point out, the reason I'm bringing up all the stuff about Mamdani's family is because of clips like here that further highlight, again, just how insincere and shady and weird the guy's entire life story and background is.
I worked until January, and then I took time away from my job. And one of the major reasons I could do so was because I knew that if I ran out of my savings, my family would be able to support me.
Yeah, so Mr. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment, I'm a regular guy, admitted years ago in his little socialist communist meeting here that he's fortunate because he doesn't have to work a job in order to pursue his socialist activism because his family and his parents will basically just bankroll all of it. Okay, the guy's literally a trust fund baby, claiming, I know how New Yorkers feel. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment. Okay, yeah. And if you think the story gets any better with his other family members, here, for instance, is Zohran Mamdani's father, who I really have to beg the question, what kind of sane immigration policy would ever allow this person or Zohran himself to be allowed into this country, much less become citizens? But here is him, just about 3 years ago, stating, and I quote, that America is the root of all evil and was the inspiration for the Nazis. Hitler learned the genocide from Abraham Lincoln. Like, that's how much this guy hates, despises, and resents America. But of course, you will be told, hey, if you don't see Zohran Mamdani or Mehdi Hassan or any of these other characters that are similar in scope and nature to be quote unquote real Americans, you're a racist, you're an Islamophobe. No, actually, maybe it's just the things they're saying. Right? like literally, I hate America. And then we're like, so you hate America? No, we're actually as American as you or I. We're the most Americans of all you guys. You just said you hated America. And then as usual, right, what do they always do? As I just said in the beginning, call us Islamophobes for pointing out the things that they say. Repeated cases of this time and time again. And you notice it's growing, right? From a lot of these progressive commentators who claim or identify to be Muslim. Take a listen.
America is the genesis of what we call settler colonialism. And the American model was exported all around the world. Abraham Lincoln generalized the solution of reservations. They herded American Indians into separate territories. For the Nazis, this was the inspiration. Hitler realized two things. One, that genocide was doable. It is possible to do genocide. That's what Hitler realized. Second thing Hitler realized is that you don't have to have a common citizenship. You can differentiate between people. The Nuremberg laws were patterned after American laws. Anyway, the US put Indians in reservations. The US invented the model.
Oh, really? Is that so? Is that why the US went to war with Nazi Germany? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But again, okay, so the US is evil. They're the genesis of settler colonialism. And yet here you guys are. So what are we supposed to think? You say that America's evil, you're running for office, you hate America, and then we point out, you're running for office and you hate America, you probably want to destroy America. You're an Islamophobe. You're just saying that because I'm a Muslim. You just said it, dude, right? And then secondly, you freaking scumbag, you want to lecture me about settler colonialism? What about what your entire family's been doing in Africa, huh? You talk about the colonialism of the past because 200 years ago, these white people did. What are you doing right now? Okay, your whole family moved from India or whatever to go to these third world African countries knowing that you could basically exploit the local populace and become super rich in those places, just running business dealings. And then in the case of Uganda, they freaking drove you out of there because they're so pissed at you. And these people, the actual colonists of the modern century, are trying to lecture some like random white guy in Nebraska. You need to own your collective guilt. You need to stop being Islamophobic, okay? You need to let, Sharia law take over your town. How about no? How about like you are the most opportunistic scumbags ever, and you don't even belong in the United States of America, okay? Case in point, you just said you hate it, so why are you here? What kind of immigration system was anyone in this country thinking of saying, oh yeah, let's just bring that person in? Yeah, he hates America. He says America is worse than Nazi Germany. Okay, yeah, check mark. Citizenship. Okay. But people still don't believe that the immigration system is basically a weapon for the Democrat Party in the way it's being structured. I mean, yeah, just look at polls like this right here. Of course, the problems for the campaign don't stop there. Just over the weekend, as we said, Zohran held a massive rally outdoors in New York City. One of those speakers was Kathy Hochul, who is one of the many establishment Democrat politicians who thinks that by endorsing Zohran in this like progressive tidal wave of energy within the party, that it's going to save them, right? If I appease the radical, crazy, violent leftists, then I'm going to be able to fend off a primary challenge. Except you could see the strong evidence that was not true, as she almost gets booed off the stage by chants of tax the rich, and Zohran Mamdani basically has to come in and escort her off. And the reason, of course, they're chanting tax the rich is not just because they support Zohran, but secondly because, as I brought up before, one of the big problems in his campaign right now is the fact that he wants to fund free buses by raising New York City state income tax, but the governor of the state, right, Kathy Hochul, has said no new taxes is her campaign platform. So I've pointed out, if nothing changes there, Zohran has no way to actually fund the free buses. And so, but of course, right, Kathy basically just said, I endorse Zohran because I don't want to get destroyed by the progressives. And then, of course, here's how the progressives thank her and treat her, as you could expect, right? Caving to the mob is just not going to work, but check it out.
I can hear you. But here's my friends. You want to see Zohran or not? Listen, I got one plea for you. I love to see this energy and this passion. And for those of you who've not been involved in the voting or even campaigns before, I am so excited about what is going on here. But I need you to do something. All right, one more thing.
What's funny is the belief that she or Hakeem Jeffries, who now recently over the weekend has also finally endorsed Zohran Mamdani, as we expected, by the way, and all these establishment characters, is that any of them think they're about to end up any different than the position Andrew Cuomo is in right now, right? If I appease them, then that'll work. No, it's not going to work. I'm just going to tell you that right now. What of course, Hochul is now following up to that debacle by now claiming she doesn't know what the crowd was chanting last night. Now, from our angle, it sounded pretty obvious. Maybe she genuinely didn't. I don't know. She's probably just playing dumb if we're being real. But her response, this stupid, is saying, and I quote, I thought they were saying, let's go Bills. Yeah, that's what they were saying in New York City, which has two NFL teams, neither of which are the Buffalo Bills. Does that even make any sense? The entire stadium in New York is chanting, let's go, Bill. What? That's nonsense. That's ridiculous, right? But take a listen.
I thought they were saying, let's go Bills. I wasn't sure. When you're up there, I heard some noise. I heard a lot of cheers. But later on, it became clear to me that I know there's passion for that. I went in there as the leader of the Democratic Party, whose job it is to unify behind the Democratic nominee. I love the energy out there. I told them that. And I want to do is bottle all that up, use it in a few days, but take that to Long Island and the Hudson Valley.
Yeah, sure. Again, that just makes so much sense. But here is the hilarious picture is, as we talked about in the beginning, not only are these establishment Democrats trying to get behind this new movement, hoping that the progressive supporters will somehow like them or stop hating them, which, spoiler alert, they won't. But secondly, right, the turnout, the early data is seeming to suggest the movement they think they're getting behind in terms of, oh, this is the future, this has all the momentum, this is it, might not actually be so true. Right? Turns out it's currently pacing that while Zohran will win, okay, I don't think anything can change that at this point. Doesn't matter if Curtis drops out or not, as I've been saying, right? Cuomo just not a good candidate. But it might not really be as a big of a support base as you think, which honestly we try to tell you, right? I mean, the guy's always been AstroTurf from the beginning. Okay, so he beat Andrew Cuomo. Big whoop. You mean to tell me he beat the guy with like an insane 56% favorability rating? I think like only 30% of all New Yorkers have a favorable view of him. Yeah, okay. So you got the washed up establishment loser who has like every scandal in the book. He's widely disliked. He was a terrible governor. So you beat him in a deep blue city, and then you're like, this is a nationwide mandate. This is a future. A couple months later, even in New York City, here's the reality, right? Underperforming, 44% Zohran. Yeah, that really means mandate, right? You got 44% of the vote. Okay. All right, with that said, though, and by the way, same people who said Trump doesn't have a mandate because he didn't get 50%. Yeah, he got like, 49.8%? Zohran, you're not even going to get that, it's looking like. So, yeah. Good job, buddy. All right, that said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you were new, and until next time, God bless and peace.